The provincial government recently mandated that as of 2020, Ontario secondary school students must take at least 4 credits out of the 30 needed to graduate online. To help us better understand what educators, students, and parents need to know about digital learning, let's welcome, in Vancouver, British Columbia via Skype, Randy Labonte, CEO of the Canadian e-Learning Network. And here in our studio, Jeff Cummings, Technology-Enabled Learning Coordinator with the Wellington Catholic District School Board, and Behan Farhadi, doctoral candidate at the University of Toronto, completing the first ever study on the Toronto District School Board's efforts in e-learning. Good to have everybody on our program tonight for this timely discussion. We should acknowledge off the top, before we get started, TVO is a provider of e-learning services and one of the Government of Ontario's partners in digital learning, and we put that out there for everybody to know in the interests of full disclosure. Behan, get us started here. In the government's new plan, as we suggested, 4 online credits to graduate from high school. That's going to be new starting next year. What do we think?
I think I'm going to say we collectively, that's specifically the 4 credits mandated for all students in all of Ontario is disappointing. From my perspective, it's negligent.
Negligent?
Negligent, yeah.
In what respect?
Because I think, from what I understand, that these courses are going to be students are going to be taking their entire course online. There has been very little by way of details. There has been little mentioned about what kind of support students will receive, and it says in the announcement that it was going to replace secondary program grants, which is intended for arts education and experiential learning. And so the wording of this announcement in having e-learning represent what they call modernization as replacing what was intended to develop a well-rounded student is negligent.
So you are not a fan. Jeff, how about you?
I would agree with some of the points that Behan's made for sure. We certainly have some questions about how this is going to look. But I do think it has raised some positive aspects here about e-learning in general, how it's delivered, and it has us now thinking about how we can ensure equitable outcomes, because that is certainly going to be a challenge in this in this rollout. How do we ensure learners across the province have access to devices, Wi-Fi, etc.? E-learning is here. I believe it's here to stay. This is certainly an expansion of what we originally had seen. It took away choice, and now we have this mandatory program. So there's some real positives here to opening discussion for sure.
So I'm marking you down as maybe yes, maybe no.
I'm going to be in the middle a little bit here.
Cautiously optimistic, maybe.
Sure.
Okay, Randy, how about you on this?
Well, I would say that I'm actually supportive of any initiative that includes some e-learning components. However, not in place of or instead of. I think that e-learning is an excellent vehicle and form for learning to occur. But the challenges in terms of the scalability of the announcement is what causes me concern. And without details, it's very difficult to comment. There are no comparables to a program announcement such as the scale Ontario has. We've not found anything in other jurisdictions that is at that kind of level. And if it is mandatory, that also sets requirements which may, again, be very challenging and difficult to come forward with.
Well,
however, the Minister of Education, just on the program earlier, had announced that the focus on teachers and support for teachers was a primary driver. And I'd like to take the minister at her word for that.
You mentioned the word mandatory in that answer. Most of the e-learning all of the e-learning in Ontario that goes on right now is all voluntary. The stuff that we provide here is all voluntary. It's students who want to do it. No one's telling them they have to. Do you think making it mandatory changes the game at all?
I would say that it ties the hands of the programs and the success of the programs that currently are offering e-learning, in that they are very careful in terms of how the programs are designed for the individual student to ensure that it meets their learning requirements. And I think that that's where the importance is in the details about how this implementation may roll out. and I think Jeff indicated it quite likely, there are very many positive aspects to it. And certainly, Bayan, you've noted that there are also some negative consequences. And what's important is in the design and the structure of the programs and the supports that are provided, not just to students, but also to teachers in how that program is actually implemented.
Can we just, some quick stats here. Have you got any sense about how many people are doing e-learning in Toronto or in Ontario or Canada right now?
In the context of Toronto, there are 73,000 high school students. I took a look at 1,200 seats, roughly. That's probably about 1.5% to be generous, which is like a sort of medium-sized school.
So 1.5% soon is going to turn into 100%.
Yeah.
If the government continues along this course.
Yeah.
You look very unhappy with
I'm
that news.
very unhappy about it.
Is it just a question that different people learn different ways and some people can't learn online? Is that your concern?
My concern is that when we say some people learn differently, it doesn't take into account which people. So what was really clear in my findings in Toronto was that the students who chose e-learning were in high achieving schools largely, and those, you're familiar with the 3 cities map. They were mapped along the sort of more sort of wealthy areas of the city, and the city particularly is racialized and multicultural, and so I'm sitting here thinking about what it means to promote a multicultural learning environment. I'm thinking about what it means that we have really stark contrast between students who are resourced and under-resourced, and what that looks like along racial and cultural lines.
Let me get Randy to respond to that. You want to come back on some of that, Randy?
Yeah, I would agree. I think Bayan is putting a cautionary out that's really important. But again, that's the experience of one board in one program in one part of a province. I have seen e-learning used quite successfully for marginalized students. I have seen those students that have high anxiety, that have been bullied, that learning in a classroom environment with the structures that are there are not as successful for them, and I've seen them thrive in e-learning. So I think that the caution is in the implementation, the design of how e-learning is used as another environment. In the same way, when I was teaching elementary school, I used the library as an environment for some students. Some students could work well in that environment. Others needed more structure if we were going to use the environment. So I think there's some positives that are here, and I think, as Jeff said, it's shining a light towards e-learning in the province, which I think is important. But the devil is in the details around the implementation. And again, I would take the minister's word to say that the supports will be there, and that the option around opting in or opting out in the case of students that are not necessarily going to thrive in that particular environment, that the school boards have that option and opportunity to ensure that they have an alternate means of learning for those students.
Jeff, tell us about Wellington Catholic and what percentage of your students right now might be e-learning.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point about context. Local contexts are important. So the context of Toronto, that is certainly a concern, and I'm hearing that, and I'd love to read that study and hear more about that. Our context is different, and we're a small board.
Rural.
We have some rural students.
Yeah.
Significant growth, though. We have seen, and I would. These are some stats I can give you. I wouldn't know how many exactly, but we started with around 80 students about 8 years ago, and today we're looking at 1,000 students getting e-learning. So that's significant
And how's
growth.
it going?
Well, I think it's been quite positive experience in our board, and I take all the concerns to heart. I certainly hear all those, but our students have been taking courses predominantly in the summer as a reach ahead model. These are students who are looking for different types of learning experience in their regular day school. So they're reaching ahead in summer so that they can take more hands-on learning, co-op, experiential learning,
Just so I understand, reaching ahead means they're trying to get ahead for next time.
They
as
are.
opposed to making up courses they flunked in the past.
Correct.
So they're unusually motivated then.
Correct.
Okay, so would your experience then on how successful the online material and the online approach takes, you can't really can you extrapolate from your experiences at Wellington to a broader provincial scene?
Well, I think that's where I'm going with this, is that every board, every local community has been different. We've invested in our teachers significantly in how to deliver these courses in engaging ways. our thinking has been around the support. We have people who are, it is their main role to go directly to a student who is in need of support, who is suffering, who needs school to home connection. We have those supports in place so that we think all learners are being supported in that way. Again, in our model, we are a small board. We're able to do that differently than TDSB, who has extremely larger board and significant differences than where our board is.
Much more multicultural population that it's serving as well.
For sure, potentially.
Yeah. Can you tell me, Behan, whether you believe online education can work?
I would suspect that some of the references that Randy has made are not entirely online. So students who are taking a course and are having some access to their face-to-face environments, that could look like having a contact that they return to if they are struggling. It might look like someone checking in on them if they are absent. It might look like a kind of more blended model where students are also, accessing a lot of face-to-face instruction. And so I think that in the context of this announcement, where I strongly suspect, my educated opinion, is it's going to be a student taking their entire coursework online with a teacher.
Without any real person backing it up?
Well, we could say, I would say even so far as, let's say, having a guidance counselor or having someone there. The logistics are probably quite challenging to ensure all students have that access. But say even in that instance, to be generous, I suspect that there are going to be many, many students left behind.
Randy, fair to say that not every student can succeed online?
I would say that the devil is in the issue is around the supports that go in there. So as Ben said, is that many programs across the country have been very successful. When they started, they did a lot more of the at a distance without the supports. In order to ensure that there was success for all students, is that a lot of the programs built in more opportunities for face-to-face time, for local supports, and they worked very hard to ensure that some of that connection that Ben, you're speaking of is in place. So it's if you're suggesting and talking about stepping back to where it is basically a correspondence model, where content is pushed out to students and they're expected to send that back to a teacher who marks it. We know that that model has not been as successful in the past from experiences, and many of the programs have evolved towards a much more integrated model where the delivery and the connections are built at the local school and local school district level. And that's very much, Jeff, what you're describing the programs, which is very similar to the consortiums of boards which are sharing e-learning programs and sharing content and teachers across the different board structures. And I know for a fact in Ontario that e-learning has been a solution for the last 2 decades for the Francophone boards in order to keep the students engaged in French language instruction and courses instead of them going to the Anglophone schools for that. So they see it as very much as a very strength to ensure cultural and language identity remains in those rural communities as well as urban communities in the Francophone community in Ontario.
Well, Behan, confirm or deny for me if you would. I presume if you have learning disabilities, online is going to be tough for you. I presume that if you're somewhere on the spectrum, as it relates to Asperger's or autism or something, e-learning is going to be tough for you. You got to have a backstop, an actual person backstopping you in that case for it to work. True or false?
So in my work, there was a disproportionate number of students who were gifted. Almost double what you would see in the board. The number of students who had learning disabilities were about the same. There were a number of students who I actually had interviewed. There were 2 I interviewed who were hard of hearing, and it was really, really helpful. So I think that there are. To be honest, I think about college-bound students who are offered almost no options online. I checked out. I don't know if you can speak to that as well about your own sort of board, but if boards aren't offering college stream courses, and if college stream courses are generally the ones that require more, like they're more challenges timetabling those courses, I would ask why. Like, why is it that we're currently not serving students who are because not everyone's heading to university.
You want to pick that up?
I do. That's a fair point. There's a disproportionate number of students taking university level courses currently. And I know the ministry has done work on college level courses. There's been revamps to the content to update them, to modernize them. But the reality is that there is still a difference in the number of students taking at that level. So does that create inequity? Certainly. And because we now have potentially this system where university-bound students are getting more flexibility in timetable, where they are getting that potential outcome of being able to take courses that are more hands-on and unique. That is a concern for sure. And so I do know this, though, the ministry has been working on ways, and it is in part of our design. I work with a group, Contacts, we're called, Technology-Enabled Learning Teachers. And that has been the crux of our work, is around supporting all learners. And so that is definitely one place that has been targeted open level and college level students.
Randy, we had an expression back in my day, I don't know if they still use it, but if a course wasn't all that challenging or was pretty easy or a little bit dorky, we called it a bird course. And I have heard over the past many years that online courses, a lot of online courses, are thought to be quote-unquote bird courses. Can you speak to that?
Well, I would be cautious about making generalizations and statements like that. We often get caught in that type of rhetoric in education. It's not black and white, it's not simple. Were some of the programs before offering credits or giving credit without the level of scrutiny that may occur in a classroom or may occur in other programs? The answer to that is yes. I've seen a rationalization of that across the country, whereby the academic standards and integrity is certainly there and strong. I've also seen programs that have been designed specifically using e-learning components to address those students that are marginalized and not successful in mainstream high schools or classrooms. So it's been applied differently. And I think the challenge here is really what's in front of Ontario is the scalability. Because if it's not supported as it has evolved and has programs are seen to incorporate different components in terms of support, if those supports do not come and they're not part of what's envisioned as the program with this announcement, then the scalability will end up with an inferior product.
Jeff, help me with this. If not every student has the same access to internet, to high-speed internet, to high-quality internet, and you have to take courses online, you got to get 4 credits online. How do you see that playing out?
I think I see that being problematic, and I think that is a beginning point. There has to be conditions in place to ensure that this is a successful learning environment for students. So the Wi-Fi is essential. There is no question that every student has to have access to a device.
Like some boards are going to have Wi-Fi on the buses, for goodness sakes, and others aren't.
Our board does. We do that.
You do.
We utilize that for learning time, for e-learning courses. So, but this is the type of thinking that's going to have to go into this program for it to be successful. And it's totally unfair if a student is out there who doesn't have a device that they can access at home. So it will have to be part of the conditions for success for these students, in addition to the learning tools that could support students who are on IEP.
IEP?
Individual education program.
Okay.
So we have to have all this in the design of the program for it to be successful. I'm hoping that the ministry engages all of the boards and the educators who have this expertise, and the parents. They need to be part of this dialogue when we see the final product come out, before we see the final product come out, because it has to have these learning conditions.
Do you know how the government plans to make sure there's a level playing field for all of its students?
I'm cynical.
I'm picking that up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the wording of the announcement was, yeah. So all this to say, I don't know. We don't have details. I have a lot of questions, and I think I would say this, that the announcement to roll it in so quickly is concerning when we have so much that we need to do to ensure.
I'm inferring from that you think there wasn't a lot of thought behind the announcement.
I'm going to make a bet that there wasn't.
So
much.
why do you think they're doing it?
I think it's I may be misspeaking, but I understand that there are, even with the class sizes, they would enroll a few more students in there because there's higher attrition anticipated. I think they're going to do it because it's an easy fix to a spatial problem, right? With school closures and labor issues. Like there's a way in which what is disappointing to me is I think the work Randy has done and Jeff has done is important, and this kind of announcement diminishes that and disrespects what potential e-learning really has in the classroom.
Randy, the suggestion here is that this was driven more by the need to save money and reduce bodies in the education system as opposed to promoting the values and the good things about e-learning. You want to speak to that?
Likely not, in the sense that I'm not sure what the motivations of the government were. I just know that there is an incredible challenge in the scaling up of what is required based on the announcement. And so I'm encouraged by the fact that the ministry is open to and listening to boards and programs and those who have had some background in e-learning and how that might be managed effectively. And I think, again, that's the important point to bring voices to the table at the ministry. Ontario's had a rich success and history in terms of its centralization and support that has been provided. There's district contacts in each of the school boards that are provided specific to technology and labeled learning and e-learning. There is a provincial license for a learning management system that is provided. There is provincial content that is created. That is not the case in other provinces. Ontario has a lot of richness to it and available for teachers and boards to be successful with this. And I think it's important that the strategies that are in place that make Ontario quite successful, that are leading to anywhere from an 85 to a 93% completion rate for students in the taking e-learning courses, that success continues forward in the scaled up environment here. And I would encourage everyone to bring their voices to the Ministry of Education before their May 31st consultation deadline.
Well, to that end, I got 30 seconds left. Jeff, this is going to hit you where you live. You're the board that's going to have to implement this policy. Any advice you want to give to the minister here?
I would love to see contacts and the boards and the local communities engaged on how to implement this model, incorporate our thinking, incorporate the work that we've done to support various initiatives with the e-learning so that we create a program that makes every kid successful. I have 3 kids in the system. I have an investment here. I want to see an education system that supports their needs.
Gotcha. Thanks to the 3 of you for coming on TVO tonight discussing this. Randy Labonte, the CEO of the Canadian e-learning network in Vancouver, British Columbia. Jeff Cummings with the Wellington Catholic District School Board, and Behan Farhadi. Good luck finishing up that doctoral thesis of yours. You're almost there. She's completing her first study, the first study on the TDSB e-learning phenomenon. Thanks to the 3 of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.